You know, there's something profoundly misunderstood about solitude, something that society has systematically trained you to fear from the moment you were born. We've been taught that being alone is a problem to be solved, a condition to be remedied, evidence that something is wrong with you or your life. We measure the quality of existence by how many friends you have, how busy your social calendar is, how rarely you find yourself without company. And anyone who chooses solitude, who actually prefers their own company to the company of others, is viewed with suspicion or pity. They must be lonely, damaged, unable to connect, missing out on the richness of life. But what if everything you've been taught about being alone is back? What if solitude is not a deficit but a gift? What if the ability to be truly alone, genuinely comfortable with only yourself, is not a weakness but the greatest power you could possibly develop? What if almost everything of value, every insight, every transformation, every moment of genuine clarity and creativity and connection with your authentic self, what if all of it requires the kind of deep solitude that most people are too terrified to ever experience? If you've discovered the power of solitude, if you've learned to not just tolerate but genuinely cherish your time alone, please give this video a thumbs up and share what you've discovered in the comments below. And if you want to understand why being alone might be the most important capacity you could develop, subscribe to this channel. Now, before we go further, I need to make a crucial distinction, because this is where most people get confused. There is an enormous difference between loneliness and aloneness, between isolation and solitude, between being abandoned by others and choosing to be with yourself. Loneliness is what you feel when you're disconnected from yourself and desperately seeking that connection through others. Loneliness is the pain of being surrounded by people who don't see you, who don't understand you, who are relating to their image of you rather than your actual self. Loneliness is the ache of performing constantly and never being met in your authenticity. But aloneness, true solitude, is something entirely different. Aloneness is coming home to yourself after years of abandoning yourself for others' approval. Aloneness is the relief of finally being able to drop all performance and simply exist. Aloneness is the spaciousness that emerges when you're no longer managing others' perception or absorbing others' energy or contorting yourself to fit into relationships that require you to be less than you are. The first reason being alone is your greatest power is that solitude is the only place where you can hear yourself, where your authentic voice can finally emerge from beneath the noise of everyone else's opinions and expectation and demand. Think about your daily life, about how much of your mental and emotional space is occupied by others. You're thinking about what people said to you, what you should have said back, what you need to do for them, what they think of you, what they expect from you, whether you're meeting their stand, whether they approve of your choices. You're absorbing their emotional state, their anxieties, their dramas, their need. You're adjusting your behavior based on their presence, moderating your expression, performing versions of yourself that fit different audiences. And in all of this constant external focus, all this attending to others, where are you? Where is your authentic voice, your genuine knowing, your actual desires and feelings and truth? They're buried, drowned out, inaccessible beneath the overwhelming noise of everyone else. But in solitude, real solitude, extended time, alone, without distraction or external demand, something extraordinary happens. The noise begins to quiet. The voices of others, the expectations and judgment and opinions that fill your head, they start to fade. And in that quieting, in that spaciousness, you begin to hear something you may not have heard clearly in years or even decades. You begin to hear yourself, your actual thought, not the thoughts you've absorbed from others, your genuine feelings, not the feelings you think you should have, your authentic desires, not the desires that would gain approval or seem impressive, your real knowing, the wisdom that exists beneath all your conditioning and performance and people-pleasing. This is invaluable beyond measure, because how can you live authentically if you can't even hear your authentic self? How can you make choices that serve your actual path if you you don't know what your path is, because you've never been quiet enough to discover it. I remember someone describing their first extended silent retreat, 10 days without speaking, without external stimulation, just alone with themselves. And they said the first 3 days were torture, absolute agony, because their mind was screaming, filling the silence with anxiety and memories and plans and judgments and endless noise. But around day 4 or 5, something shifted. The internal noise began to settle like sediment in water. And in that settling, in that clarity, they began to hear things they'd never heard before. Desires they'd been suppressing for years because they didn't fit the image they were maintaining. Resentments they'd been carrying but never acknowledging. Griefs they'd been avoiding by staying perpetually busy and surrounded. But also joy, genuine, uncomplicated joy in simple things. Curiosity about questions they'd stopped asking. Clarity about what actually mattered to them versus what they'd been told should matter. And they realized they'd been living someone else's life, making choices based on voices that weren't their own, because they'd never been still enough, alone enough to hear their actual voice beneath all the other. The second reason being alone is your greatest power is that solitude forces you to develop a relationship with yourself. And this is the only relationship that truly matters, because it's the foundation for every other relationship you'll ever have. Most people have almost no relationship with themselves. They don't know who they are when nobody's watching. They don't know how to be with themselves without distraction or entertainment or external validation. They don't know what they actually think or feel or want, because they've never spent enough time alone to discover. Instead, they know themselves only through others' reflection, through the roles they play, through the performances they've crafted. They're strangers to themselves, and this strangeness creates a desperate dependence on others. They need constant company, constant distraction, constant external validation, because being alone means confronting the stranger they've avoided their entire life, confronting the emptiness where self-knowledge should be. But when you spend substantial time alone, when you commit to really being with yourself rather than just occupying the same space as yourself while distracted, something profound develops. You begin to know yourself, not the image you project, not the role you play, but your actual self with all its contradiction and complexity and strain. You begin to understand your pattern, your triggers, your defenses, your desire, your fear. You begin to see how your mind works, how your emotions move, how your energy flows. You develop the capacity to be with yourself in all your state, comfortable, uncomfortable, happy, sad, calm, anxious, all of it. And this self-knowledge, this capacity to be genuinely present with yourself, this transforms everything. Because when you have a solid relationship with yourself, when you genuinely know and accept and can be with yourself, you stop being desperate for others. You stop needing them to fill an emptiness in you. You stop seeking validation or completion or worth through them. You can engage with others from wholeness rather than from lack, from genuine interest rather than desperate need, from authenticity rather than performance. And paradoxically, this makes you far more capable of genuine connection than someone who's constantly surrounded by people but has no relationship with themselves. Because real connection requires that two authentic selves meet. And if you don't know your authentic self because you've been avoiding being alone with it, genuine connection is impossible. You can have transactions, performances, mutual validation, but not real meeting. Think about the people you know who cannot be alone, who fill every moment with company or distraction, who become anxious and uncomfortable the moment they're by themselves. What kind of relationships do they have? Usually shallow ones, based on need and performance rather than genuine connection, because they're bringing an empty self to every interaction, a self that doesn't know itself and is desperately seeking others to tell it who it is, to validate its existence, to fill the void where self-knowledge should be. But the person who has spent time alone, who has developed a genuine relationship with themselves, who knows themselves deeply and can be genuinely present with themselves, this person brings something entirely different to relationship. They bring presence, authenticity, wholeness, and this attracts entirely different kinds of connection. The third reason being alone is your greatest power is that solitude is where creativity and insight and genius emerge, and they cannot emerge anywhere else. Every significant breakthrough, every profound insight, every creative work of genuine originality, every spiritual realization, all of it emerges from solitude, not from brainstorming sessions or social gathering or collaborative efforts, though these have their place, but from deep, sustained time alone, where your mind can move beyond the surface, beyond the conventional, beyond the collected wisdom and opinions of others, into genuinely new territory. Think about everyone who's created something truly original or had insights that transformed understanding. Artists, writers, scientists, philosophers, spiritual teachers, what do they all have in common? Extended period of solitude, time alone to think deeply, to explore without external interference, to follow threads of thought or feeling or intuition wherever they lead without having to explain or justify or make sense to anyone else. This is not accidental. Creativity requires space, silent freedom from others' expectations and judgment. Your creative self, your deepest knowing, your capacity for original thought, these are shy, delicate things. They don't emerge when you're busy managing social dynamics or performing for others or filling your mind with everyone else's ideas and opinion. They emerge in silence, in aloneness, in the spaciousness that comes from extended time without external demands or stimulation. When you're alone, really alone, without distraction or entertainment or the constant input of others' thoughts and feeling, your mind begins to move different. At first, it replays familiar pattern, recycles known thought, replays conversations and memories. But if you stay alone long enough, if you don't flee back to distraction or company, something deeper begins to stir. Connections you've never made before start forming. Questions you've never asked begin arising. Insights that were waiting beneath the noise of daily life finally surface. Your creative self, your genuine knowing, the part of you that's connected to something larger than your conditioned mind, this begins to speak. I knew someone who was struggling with a decision that had implications for their entire future. They'd asked everyone's opinion, read books, made lists of pros and cons, analyzed endlessly, but they couldn't find clarity because they were too full of everyone else's wisdom, everyone else's opinion, everyone else's ideas about what they should do. Finally, they went alone to a cabin for a week with no phone, no internet, no book, nothing but themselves and nature. And they said the first few days were uncomfortable, almost unbearable, because they were so accustomed to constant stimulation and input. But around day 4, something opened. They weren't trying to figure out the decision anymore, weren't analyzing or thinking about. They were just walking in the forest, and suddenly they knew, not intellectually, not through reasoning, but with a deep, cellular knowing that felt completely different from all the mental analysis they'd been doing. The answer had been there all along, waiting beneath all the noise. But it couldn't reach them until they created enough space, enough silence, enough solitude for it to emerge. The fourth reason being alone is your greatest power is that solitude teaches you that you are complete, that you don't need anything external to be whole. And this realization liberates you from almost every form of dependency and manipulation. Most people's lives are organized around the desperate belief that they're incomplete, that they need something or someone external to make them whole. They need a relationship to feel lovable. They need success to feel worthy. They need approval to feel acceptable. They need possessions to feel secure. They need constant stimulation to feel alive. And this belief in their own incompleteness makes them vulnerable, manipulable, dependent. They can be controlled through withholding what they believe they need. They can be manipulated through promising what they think will complete them. They're in a constant state of seeking, reaching, grasping for something outside themselves that will finally make them whole. But solitude, deep and sustained solitude, reveals something revolutionary. You discover that you're already complete, that the wholeness you've been seeking externally exists within you and has always existed within you, that you don't need a relationship to feel love because you can experience love in your own presence, that you don't need success or approval or possessions to feel worthy because your worth is inherent, not earned, that you don't don't need constant external stimulation to feel alive, because life itself, pure existence, your own awareness, is already alive, already rich, already enough. This discovery is not intellectual. You can't think your way to it or believe it because someone told you. You have to experience it direct, and you can only experience it in solitude, when all the external props and distractions and relationships and validations are removed, and you're faced with just yourself, just existence itself, and you discover it's enough. You're enough. Being is enough. And once you know this, once you've experienced your own completeness directly, everything changes. You're no longer desperate, no longer grasping, no longer vulnerable to manipulation through your sense of lack. You engage with life from sufficiency rather than deficiency, from wholeness rather than seeking, from genuine choice rather than desperate need. You can have relationship, but you don't need them to complete you. You can pursue success, but not because you need it to validate your worth. You can enjoy possessions and experiences, but not because you're trying to fill an emptiness. You're free in a way that people who've never experienced solitude can never be free, because your sense of wholeness comes from within rather than depending on external conditions that are always changeable, always ultimately beyond your control. Think about how much power this gives you. When you know you're complete, when you've discovered your own sufficiency in solitude, you cannot be controlled through promising or withholding external things. You cannot be manipulated through your neediness because you're not need. You cannot be threatened with abandonment because you're fundamentally okay alone. You cannot be pressured into compromising your integrity or authenticity for approval, because you don't need approval to know you're okay. This is real power. Not power over others, but power over your own life. Freedom from the dependencies and manipulation that keep most people trapped in situations and relationships and ways of being that don't serve. The fifth reason being alone is your greatest power is that solitude allows you to process and integrate your experience without the constant interference and interpretation of others. Life is constantly giving you experiences, information, challenges, lessons, but most people never actually process these experiences, never truly integrate what life is teaching them, because they immediately go to others for interpretation. Something happens, and before they've even felt their own response to it, they're telling people about it, asking for opinions, getting others' interpretation. And these external interpretations, well-meaning as they might be, actually prevent you from discovering your own understanding, your own meaning, your own lesson from your experiences. When you're alone, when you have time and space to be with your experiences without immediately externalizing them, something different happens. You can feel your actual response. You can notice what the experience triggered in you, what it revealed, what it's asking you to see or learn or change. You can discover your own meaning rather than adopting someone else's interpretation. You can integrate the experience into your understanding. Let it change you. Let it teach you what it has to teach, without that teaching being mediated through others' framework and belief and projection. This is how real growth happens, how genuine wisdom develops, not through collecting others' interpretations, but through directly encountering your own experience and discovering its meaning for yourself. I remember someone telling me about a difficult breakup they went through. Their first instinct was to immediately call friend, to process it with others, to get support and validation and help understanding what happened. But something made them pause, made them choose to be alone with it first, and they spent weeks alone, feeling the grief, the anger, the confusion, the loss, without trying to make sense of it or fix it or get others' interpretation. And slowly, in that solitude, understanding began to emerge. They saw patterns in themselves they'd never seen before. They recognized how they'd been repeating the same dynamics in relationship after relationship. They understood what they actually needed and wanted, that they'd been compromised. They integrated lessons that would have been impossible to learn if they'd immediately gone to others for comfort and interpretation, because others would have given them the easy answers, the validating interpretation, the explanations that let them off the hook. But in solitude, they had to face themselves, and facing themselves allowed genuine growth that transformed how they showed up in all ideal future relationship. The sixth reason being alone is your greatest power is that in solitude you discover that you are not alone, that there's something vast and alive and intelligent that you're always connected to when you're not distracted by the noise of constant socializing and stimulation. This might sound paradoxical, but it's the testimony of everyone who has spent extended time in genuine solitude. When you're truly alone, when the external noise quiets and your internal noise begins to settle, you begin to notice something that's always been there but was drowned out by everything else. A presence, an aliveness, a consciousness that's larger than your individual self. Some call it God, some call it the universe, some call it consciousness itself, some call it nature, some have no name for it. But everyone who's spent time in deep solitude eventually encountered this sense of being held, being part of something vast, being connected to an intelligence and aliveness that has nothing to do with other people or external validation or social connection. And this discovery is profound because it means you're never actually alone in the way most people fear. Yes, you're alone in the sense of not having other people around, but you're not isolated, not disconnected, not cut off from all relationship. You're in relationship with existence itself, with life, with consciousness. And this relationship, this connection, is more nourishing, more sustaining, more real than most of what passes for human connection. Because most human connection is actually quite shallow, based on performance and transaction and mutual validation. But this connection with something larger, this you can only find in solitude. And once you've found it, once you've tasted it, you understand why mystics and sages throughout history have sought solitude, not because they hate people or can't connect, but because they've discovered something in solitude that's more profound than what most social interaction offers. So where does this leave you? How do you cultivate the power of being alone in a world that's constantly pulling you toward constant connectivity and stimulation? First, you have to actually commit to being alone, really alone, not just physically alone while remaining digitally connected, not just in the same room with yourself while your attention is scattered across screens and devices. Real solitude means disconnecting from all external input for extended periods. This might mean hours, might mean days, might mean longer, depending on where you are in your development. But it needs to be substantial enough that the noise can settle, that you can move beyond the surface agitation into deeper waters. Second, you have to learn to tolerate the discomfort that arises in solitude, because it will arise. Your conditioning, your unprocessed emotion, your avoidance pattern, all of it will surface when you're alone without distraction, and your instinct will be to flee, to reach for your phone, to call someone, to do anything to avoid what's arising. But the power of solitude comes from staying, from being willing to face what emerges, from developing the capacity to be present with yourself in all your state without needing to escape or distract or seek external comfort. Third, you have to find the balance between solitude and connection, because both are necessary. You're not trying to become a hermit who never interacts with others, unless that's genuinely your path. What you're trying to do is develop the capacity for genuine solitude, so that when you do connect with others, you're connecting from wholeness rather than need, from present rather than performance, from authenticity rather than desperate seek. The goal is not to choose between solitude and connection, but to be able to move between them consciously, to value both, to use solitude to know yourself and connection to express yourself. And finally, you have to recognize that choosing solitude in a world that pathologizes it requires courage. You will be misunderstood. People will worry about you, will think you're depressed or struggling or becoming antisocial. They will pressure you to be more available, more social, more normal. And you'll have to be strong enough to choose yourself anyway, to honor your need for solitude even when it makes others uncomfortable, to trust that what you're discovering in aloneness is more valuable than others' approval of your social availability. Being alone is not a problem to be solved or a condition to be remedied. Being alone is a power to be cultivated, a capacity to be developed, a source of knowing and creativity and wholeness that cannot be found anywhere else. In solitude, you hear yourself. In solitude, you meet yourself. In solitude, you discover your completeness. In solitude, you process your experiences authentic. In solitude, you connect with something larger than yourself. And all of this, all of it, is power. Real power. Not power over others, but power over your own life. Freedom from dependency and neediness, and the endless seeking that keeps most people trapped in shallow connection and surface living. So, if you've been afraid of being alone, if you've been avoiding solitude, if you've filled your life with constant company and stimulation to avoid facing yourself, consider that what you're actually avoiding is your own power, your own depth, your own capacity for genuine life. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop running and finally discover what's been waiting for you in the solitude you've been so carefully avoiding. That discovery, that homecoming to yourself, that is the greatest power you will ever know.